Welcome, beloveds. Astarius Miraculii here, celebrating a very special anniversary. Today, January 23rd, is my 52nd anniversary of being on my spiritual path. It was January the 23rd of 1973 when I consciously stepped onto my spiritual path. And prior to sharing with you what it was that catalyzed my being on the spiritual path, I want to first give you some of my life story that led up to that. As a child, I saw spirits, and my family became very afraid. I could describe spirits and departed ones, and they knew I was seeing what I told them that I was seeing. In one particular apartment that we lived in, the people that used to live there was a husband and a wife, and the husband had taken the wife on the roof, or actually he murdered her. He shot her to death, and then went out on the roof and murdered himself, blew his brains out. And so this very tragic thing had happened, and this woman was a dancer, and she would dance through our house. I could see her, but others could not. I told my grandmother, I said, "Grandma, that lady's in your room and she's just dancing." Now for me as a little young child, it was just natural for me to see spirits. But then when my family were so terrified, then I began to take on the fear of my family. So by the time I was 11 years old, I was terrified to see anything because there was so much fear projection from my family. I grew up in a family of alcoholics. It was a very difficult childhood that I had. My mama was alcoholic my entire childhood, and I'm an only child. And sometimes on the weekend, my mother and my stepfather and my uncle and aunt would all get together, and there was always a fight. So I witnessed this treacherous fighting every other weekend or so. And my stepfather jumping on my mother and my uncle jumping on my aunt. And then and my aunt's favorite thing was the way she would fight back. She'd take all the dishes and all the plates and just break them all. Just throw all the dishes and plates down and break them. I witnessed her break up the dishes. I can't count how many times. And, you know, there were times when my stepfather was jumping on my mother, and I would try to intervene and stop him. You know, I would jump on his back and I'd be beating him on the back. And as a little child, you know, many times at the age, let's say, of 6 and 7 and 8, and I couldn't stop him, you know, but I wanted to protect my mother. Until one day when I was 11 years old, and at 11 years old, he was jumping on my mother again. And we were in the hallway just about to go into the house. And I ran outside and looked on the ground to see what I could find, you know, to intervene. And I picked up something that was jagged. And I came back in, and he was jumping on my mother, and I took it and I swiped it right across his face, and blood began to shoot out, and he stopped. He backed up. He didn't try to do anything to me, but he backed up from my mother. And so I, as a little 11-year-old, felt so grateful that I was able to intervene and stop him from beating up my mother. So this treacherous experience in the family, there's a family of alcoholics, and always the fighting, you know, it was just always, you know, witnessing this treachery. At age 11, my mother got divorced from my stepfather, which I thought he was my biological father. I never actually knew my biological father, but because my stepfather showed up when I was a baby, I always thought that he was my biological father. And then, you know, when they got divorced, you know, Mama says to me, well, you know, he wasn't your real father anyway. And, you know, but by that time, the imprint of him as my father was there. So they split. So now it's just me and Mom, and she's still into her alcoholism. And I was terrified of my mother. She was a fierce woman, and my whippings were treacherous. I don't know any other kids that got whippings that were as intense or as long as my whippings were. And when she would whip me, she would vent, you know, like she was spitting venom. And sometimes the words that she was speaking was even more painful than the actual belt. Now I had to take my pants down, and, you know, and she whipped me on my bare ass. And so it was really difficult. I mean, I was terrified of her. Now, as a child, I knew that I was afraid of Mama. But when I became older and I looked back through a regression, I realized I was actually terrified of my mother. Age 14, I went out and got drunk with some friends. We were going roller skating, and before going skating, we had this game that we played about who has the longest throat, or who can chug a lug. And we had a fifth of some alcohol called Hannah and Hog. And I was first on the bottle. I turned the bottle up, and they said, chug, chug, chug. And when I finally brought that fifth of alcohol down from drinking, there was maybe about that much left in it. So I became sloppy drunk. Went roller skating. I was falling down all over the place. After roller skating, I'm walking my girlfriend home in the snow in Chicago, falling down, and then I go home. I remember going in the front door, took my keys, opened the door, and it was snowing outside, so I had these boots, the galoshes, you know, and I remember setting my boots down, you know, with my shoes inside the boots, right by the door. And then I don't know how I got to the kitchen, but the next thing I know, I was on the kitchen floor. Mama was on top of me, and she was beating me with a fist with one hand, and she had a Coca-Cola bottle in the other hand for backup. She didn't ever hit me with the pop bottle, but I guess that was her backup, and I thought she was gonna kill me. I wrestled my way up, and I pushed Mama down, and I ran to the front door, and I grabbed my boots, and I ran out barefoot in the snow till I got far enough away that I knew, she wasn't on me, and I put my boots on and I went to the 16-story housing projects because I had nowhere to go. It's like in the middle of the night. And so I go to the top floor and I walk down floor by floor and check each laundry room door until finally I found one that was open so that I could go in there and keep warm. So I'm laying on the concrete floor, but it's warm because this is in the middle of winter time in Chicago. There's a mouse in that laundry room, and I felt so much comfort by this creature that was in there because I had been really traumatized. I thought Mama was going to kill me. So I was afraid to go back home. I kept calling back and never got an answer till finally, after 3 days, of not going home, I went back home. I let myself in with my keys, and there was a note on the dresser. It says, "Your mama is in the hospital." I go to the hospital and walk in the door, and Mama's got a big cast on her leg. I broke my mama's leg. I felt so bad. I wasn't trying to hurt Mama. I just needed to get away because it felt like she was going to kill me. She was very calm. She looked at me. She said, "Have you been going to school?" I said, "No." She, "Have you been back home?" I said, "No." She said, "Two things I want you to do for me. I want you to go back home and I want you to go to school." And so I did. 16 years old, I was a very obedient child up until 16, and then 16 I just went nuts because Mama was so strict. I mean, she was so strict. I didn't have any of the privileges that any of my friends had. And even with my girlfriend, I was so ashamed that I had to go in the house so early that I lied and told her that I was on supervision with the police, and that's why I had to be home. I was afraid to just say, my mama said I gotta be home. So it was really damaging to my self-esteem because I didn't feel the equality with other children my age. So when I stopped obeying the rules and I said, stay out as long as I want to stay out and do whatever I want to do. And so Mama said, you're not going to obey the rules. You got to leave. And I felt like it was a mutual decision because I was feeling my ego, but it was really Mama threw me out, the house at 16. I took to the streets. I lived on the streets for practically 3 years before I learned how to take care of myself. Sometimes sleeping on people's floors. And then at 16, I had a job. I was at the Whole House on 47th Street. I was the doorman. I would collect the money for the room and then time them. They got 10 minutes. It was 10 minutes for $3. Anyway, I'm hanging out in all of that treachery because I'm thinking I want to be a part of that treachery. All of my role models were pimps and hoes and gangsters and thieves and con men and con women. And I became a part of that treachery for 6 years, leading up to getting on my spiritual path. Finally, when I turned 19, I learned how to take care of myself. And God took care of me. I lived in a neighborhood where there were drive-by shootings. 3 of my friends I witnessed being murdered on the corner where the car would just drive by and shoot into the crowd, and people dropped dead, murdered. I lived in a neighborhood where people would drug overdose in the hallway and they'd find them dead in the hallway, the needles still in their arm. So there was all of this treachery, and God was kind enough to take care of me because there was just so much difficulty that I went through. And at age 21, I fell in love with a woman. I was pissed off with myself. I didn't want to feel that way about anybody. In fact, as a teenager, I grew to hate my mother. I hated my mother as a teenager. And then that morphed into a hatred toward women, because if you hate the drop, you hate the ocean. If I hate my mama, I hate women ad infinitum. I didn't fully understand that then, but that was the nature of it. So I was very mentally and emotionally treacherous toward the feminine in this hatred toward mama. So I fell in love with this woman at age 21, and I didn't want to feel love for anybody like that. I was a very treacherous and hateful human being. But God had a plan for me. This was the way in which God was slowing me down so that I could come to a place where I felt universal love, where I felt love for everybody. But I couldn't come from that human treachery straight to universal love, so I had to come by way of having a human love for another individual. And that relationship was a period of gestation. It was just 9 months. And the first time I ever heard the voice of God was at a party that we had given. I was laying on the floor with my head in my hand like that. And I went into cosmic romance with God. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. I kept saying, I love you, God. I love you, God. I love you, God. I love you, God. And bliss waves were just moving through my being. And every now and then my intellectual being would step back and look, because I never was in relationship with God. In fact, I used to pray to the pimp God, and there's no such thing. So I didn't know what was happening to me, and yet it was bliss. And God spoke to me from within and said, that relationship has done what it was meant to do, and it's time for it to end. And I knew with all that I am that God was speaking directly to me, and so I responded and said, okay, God, I will end it. I ended that relationship, and I was in so much pain because I was still deeply in love with the woman. But God told me it had done what it was meant to do, and I was obedient, and I released it. And so then one day it was like so painful for me. You know, I dropped down on my knees and I kept saying, I wish no longer to be in love. I wish no longer to be in love. And I wrote a formula to fall out of love. And I wrote it out, and it said, you know, this is the formula derived from the principle what the mind can conceive and believe the mind can achieve for the definite major purpose of curing a love Jones. And through this affirmation, within 3 days, I had no more human love for her. I had compassion, but no more human love. So I really realized that was the power of affirmation. That was the second time I realized how powerful affirmations are. You know, the first time was we had a little jingle that I was singing to the pimp God because I was trying to get a hoe. This was at age 16. Oh, I was crazy. I was out of my mind. But I manifested a hoe, you know, at 16. And thank God I realized that that wasn't my path, and God took care of me through all of that craziness. And so 3 days before my 22nd birthday, January 23rd, 1973, 52 years ago, and I will become 74 turns around the sun on my birthday 3 days from now, the 26th of January. But I consider the 23rd of January my birth date as well, my spiritual birthday. So I had left that treachery that I was in. My rent was due. It was only $80. I didn't have it. I had $30 to my name. And I had had an astrological chart, and that chart kept saying that I would benefit from an investigation of metaphysics and the occult. So I said, well, I don't have my rent, but I got $30. I know there's a occult bookstore near north side of Chicago. I jumped on the bus and went down there and bought $25 worth of books. Saved $5 for myself. Came home. 3 in the afternoon, January 23rd, 1973, I started reading. And everything that I was reading in those books was like remembering. See, oh, that's true, that's true, that's true, that's true. And I read from 3 in the afternoon to 5 o'clock the next morning. And I only stopped to do this thing that these books were talking about called meditation, which I knew instantly how to do. The next day, my whole being completely was transformed. I shaved off all the hair off of my head. I became a vegetarian. I became a celibate and jumped onto my spiritual path, with passion. And the power of the healing force was strong for me, even in the early stages. So now, I came on the spiritual path with passion. It's like, breath hath no words for how powerful it was for me. So now I have nothing but big love for Mama and all life. In fact, let me share with you a poem that I wrote for the woman that I fell in love with that brought me. I called her Mellow Mama. And I wrote her a poem called Mellow Mama, and it says, once upon a time I was very, very selfish, foolishly selfish with the gift of love. And then one day I met a little mellow mama who came to claim my love. She gave me all the love for which most people yearn. I tried and I tried not to give love in return. And then one day it seemed that she was going away. I don't mean just somewhere here on earth, but away for a permanent stay. And on that day, how to give love I did learn. For the continuation of her presence, my heart did ceaselessly burn. On that day, I did realize Mellow Mama meant the world to me. And to think she had to almost leave here just for me to see. Through all of our relations, experiences, and endeavors, I was taught the lessons of love through pain, joy, and pleasure. Now I've learned how to truly love, and I did not know at first, for now not only do I love this little Mellow Mama, but I also love the whole universe. Thank you, Mellow Mama, for showing me the way to universal love, a love so deep, a love so high, a love from within and above, a love so powerful, a love so true, a love I learned through Mellow You. And so that's how I came onto my spiritual path. Now, what happened that day is Mellow Mama and I was in my house smoking ganja, and she started having some kind of attack, like she was going to die right there in my house. And I had to take her to the hospital. And it was in the moment that it looked like she was going to die that I realized I was in love with her. Didn't know it until that moment. Went to the hospital, turned out she was just hyperventilating. But it was a catalyst to let me know that I was in love. And I was so pissed off with myself because I didn't want to feel that way about anybody. Came home and I had these mirrors over my bed on the ceiling, and I was looking up at my reflection in the mirrors on the ceiling, and I was just cursing myself out for extending my heart in that way. But it was, there's nothing I could do about it. I was in love. But that was God's plan to lead me to universal love. So now coming back to Mama, went through a lot of things with Mama. I think it was age 23, 23 or so. My aunt and my mama's then husband called me up and said, your mama's lost her mind, you need to come. We had to take Mama and commit her to the mental institution. Fortunately, Mama didn't have to stay but more than 3 weeks or so, and the doctor made a deal with her, said, I will discharge you on the grounds if you make an agreement to leave your husband, because there was a lot of turmoil there, and Mama told the doctor she would do it. And she was true to that. She did. She went home and she ended that. So Mama, and I had so much courage because I had this spiritual strength. My aunt and her then husband were so fearful. They were afraid of her, and when we were committing her, they didn't understand what was going on, and I was just so strong in my spirit as this 23-year-old. And so she got out, and but she was still drinking. And then the next thing that happened, and I think it was about 24 at that time, 25. And Mama called me up, she's in tears, and she said, I'm being evicted. They're putting my things on the streets. I didn't know Mama was financially in trouble like that. We only lived 15 minutes drive from each other. I hustled to get a U-Haul truck, and as they put Mama's belongings on the street, I put all of Mama's belongings in the truck, took her to my house. I was married at that time with an infant baby, and she lived with us for a few months. And so then the final straw was, and this was also still 25, my aunt called me up and says, you know, the janitors found your mama with a rope saying that she was going to hang herself. You better come see about your mama. And so I went, set my mama down and said, Mama, I love you, but I will not hang out and see you do what you're doing to yourself. You're going to go and get some help, or I will never have anything else to do with you. And I wasn't bluffing. I was serious. Mama went to AA the following day and didn't touch a drink for 40 years. And she became such a deeply spiritual person. I initiated my mother into Reiki. I did readings for my mother. My mother would sit at my feet as if I was her guru or something of that nature. And Mama called me the Good Shepherd. She called me Shep for short. Mama would say, Shep, you are so wise. You should have been my daddy. I don't know how I got to be your mama. Shep, you should have been my daddy. And so there was nothing but big love between my mama and I from when I was on my spiritual path, but then even bigger when she stopped drinking. And so it was 40 years or so when she made her transition in November 5th, 2016. And I conducted her memorial service, and all of her AA friends were standing up and sharing different things, and I got to see how many lives she had touched and how many people said that they were alive because of her, and she would always speak about me at the AA meetings. So anyway, that's some of my story, and I'm in big celebration and appreciation for God taking care of me and bringing me here to this juncture in my life where I could offer spiritual energies and want to offer these vocal harmonics, and appreciation for finding my way to this point and for bringing about a more elevated level of experience, an expanded experience in being a spiritual teacher, and the landslide sales of my teachings, products, and services. And also you can offer your intentions for this to facilitate your empowerment. So much gratitude to Creator Source for taking care of me, for getting me through all of that treachery that I grew up through. I bless all of it because I am the being that I am today, not in spite of all of that treachery and pain, but I am the being that I am today because of all of that. I know that everything that I curse will curse me back, and everything that I bless will bless me back, and so I bless it all and take no slack. And so I'm so grateful to be here at this 52nd anniversary of being on my spiritual path. I'm so grateful that in 3 days, on the 26th of January, I will be 74 turns around the sun and still a divine whippersnapper. And the youthfulness that I've been able to maintain has been by virtue of sacred choice. And I thank God for giving me the presence of mind and heart to know that I could preserve and evolve this body and this individualization of being in the way that I have. So thank you, beloveds, for holding space with me as I shared my story. If you didn't hear it all, be sure and go and get the replay, because it's quite a journey, and I think that you would enjoy. Many of you really love, all of the different offerings that I have that is an upliftment, and I just wanted to give you some awareness of what I made it through in order to get to this place where I am able to share the spiritual encouragement that I share. I love you so much. Fly well on the wings of Ascension.